Okay, so we're going to make a start. Welcome to everyone to today's event. I'm Mitchel. I'm the National Service Lead for PAC-UK. And I'm really delighted to be able to share with you today the premiere of our Adopted in School film. We were commissioned by the virtual schools across West Yorkshire to make a film that really captured the experiences of adopted young people and their families. The film contains really powerful messages from those young people who've shared their personal experiences so that we can kind of all use their stories and what they've shared with us to influence and support change going forward. So they invite you to view this film with an attitude of acceptance and some curiosity and empathy when you hear what they want to share with you, and to kind of hold them in mind and consider what you might do, the actions you might be able to take, having seen this film, to make their school experience more positive. So I'd like to thank the virtual schools across West Yorkshire, Bradford, Calderdale, Kirklees and Wakefield for commissioning us to make this really important film. And to the young people and their families who took part, just for their honesty and their bravery in making such an incredible film. At the end of the film, we'll have around 5 minutes, maybe a little bit more, before the close of today's events. And that'll be an opportunity to share reflections and feedback from the film. And if I can ask people in the audience, if you can do that using the chat function, because that will make it really helpful for the editable version of this session, which we'll be able to share at the end of this week. So please feel free to pop your thoughts in there. There'll also be, my colleagues will also be monitoring the chat function, and we will put the accessibility to our YouTube channel in the chat also for you to be able to access that. And we encourage you to share this film with colleagues and other professionals who are supporting children, young people and their families, again, to kind of support that change going forward. I'd ask that for anyone that has got any education related questions, that we will be sending out a feedback form at the end of the event. And we've added a section within that feedback form that asks you to raise any questions. So if you can put your questions in there alongside your email address, and we'll come back to you with a response to those questions as soon as possible. There'll also be a link within that feedback form to our education page, which will link you to some of the training that we offer and some of the resources that might be available to people, should you wish to look at those. So the film is around 25 minutes long, and people might feel having the camera off is much more helpful to concentrate. So please feel free to kind of do whatever feels okay for you. The film has really powerful messages, and I would say as a almost like a health warning, all our films that we share can resonate with people and connect with people in really different ways, and they can evoke some strong feelings. So I would urge you that you look after yourself as you watch the film and take the self-care that you might need. And without further ado, I just want to thank you for attending, and we really, really hope you enjoy this film. And I'll pop back up at the end to go through some of those reflections and feedback that you'll pop in the chat. Thank you. Enjoy.
Being adopted in school it's difficult because you feel like you're not the same as everyone else and you feel quite different. You can find it hard to learn.
I feel like it's harder for me to make friendships because I'm adopted and I don't exactly really have much friends still.
I think when you consider going into school life as an adoptee, you really do have your ups and downs. It develops that fear and that isolation that you do come across when people will alienate you as a person. They'll shove you away because they think you're really different.
Teachers don't understand that. Like, you get in trouble for it, or you get in trouble for things that you used to cope, and it's not exactly your fault. But you try to explain to the teachers and they don't listen, or they don't They see you as naughty kids.
It is quite hard because at school and that you would get picked on about being adopted.
It's like playing life behind a mask, really. That's how I can explain it, really, because underneath there is quite a lot to unpack.
If a child is adopted in school, being adopted does affect how that child is going to behave, how they're going to learn, how they're going to interact with their peers, and how they feel about themselves. So many, it's really important to listen, number one, and not just dismiss it.
You can't assume that everyone's going to be okay just because it looks that way.
It makes you feel quite upset because they don't know what you've been through, with adoption.
I think the biggest messages that schools need to think about when working with adopted young people is that, yes, they have moved into they've got more stability in their life, but that doesn't fix everything.
Teachers don't necessarily think it's a problem because they see this child who's confident, talks a lot, just looks and acts to them normally.
A young person that's not growing up in their first family and that's living and growing up in an adopted family brings a whole range of complicating factors.
Not only are they a young person managing school, which is complex anyway, there's often additional needs in there, so there's often higher diagnoses of ADHD, autism, and then there's developmental trauma in there, because we know that the average age of adoption is 3, so you've really got to think about that and what that means for a young person. There might have been several moves in the care system before they've been placed with their adoptive parents.
Whether you're a teacher, a teaching assistant, whether you're on reception or a lunchtime supervisor, it is absolutely crucial to understand what we mean when we talk about trauma.
On a normal school day, you wake up and you've got all these things going on in your head, and you've got lots of thoughts or lots of questions that you want answering about your birth family, or different things that have happened, or things that you might not even know about that have happened, but they're in your head and you don't always know what. It's just a lot in a day.
Schools and teachers need to understand that adopted children carry trauma. Trauma happens to adopted young people whose early attachments are severed, so they're no longer living with their first families.
I think what I really want to get across to teachers is that kids, and they'll know this, kids won't learn unless they feel safe within school.
I was adopted quite young. I was adopted when I was 1.5 years old. But then you forget the fact that when you're a child, for the first 6 months, you think you are your mother and that your mother is you. And so when you're taken away from that, you're going to grieve that later on without knowing you're grieving it. And because people assume, you loved so much, that they expect you to be grateful. And it's like, yeah, you can be grateful, but also sad at the same time.
It can really hold you back sometimes because teachers won't know and understand what you're going through.
Trauma can manifest itself in lots of different ways. It's not always in the ways that you expect. It might be very loud in terms of behaviour and challenges, but I think sometimes more concerningly, sometimes it's the quieter anxieties, things like perfectionism or procrastination.
The most important thing for schools and teachers to understand about adopted young people is that their behaviour is communication. It's really thinking about connection before correction, and that really restorative kind of way of working. Because what you often find that sat behind that behaviour is, I don't feel safe, I feel stupid, I don't know what I'm being asked to do, I don't fit in with my peer group, I haven't got any friends in school, I wish I was anywhere else but here.
Let's say you are somebody who will be disruptive if you're struggling in a lesson. They're going to misunderstand that as just behaving badly, not needing help. And if you're someone like me who really shuts down and is really quiet and just cannot focus, they're not going to notice to give that support.
Sometimes there's chaotic behaviour because those children have got such a lot going on in their heads and just completely chaotic thoughts. And then there are children that kind of shut down and go very, very quiet and go into themselves.
Because they can't articulate how they are feeling, their bodies respond, and that can be that really challenging behaviour, throwing something, swinging on chairs, knocking tables over. They're struggling to say, I'm really struggling here, I'm feeling really, really unsafe, I really don't know what to do, I really need help.
It's really difficult because what you see is a child that is deliberately not doing what is expected, and it looks like naughty behaviour to you. But with a child with trauma, any sort of attention is great, negative attention included, so they will just keep repetition, the same behaviour over and over again.
Last Monday, I was in school in the morning. My head was going round and round and round, and I put a headphone in just to calm myself, and just so I could get on with the work. But I got excluded for it.
I've had to deal with exclusion because people had been making fun of me because I was adopted, and I responded in a bad way, so that got me in exclusion. It made me feel like maybe they don't care because if I'm not allowed to stand up for people bullying me and they don't get exclusion, I just don't feel like that's right.
In college, my daughter had a lot of anxiety. She tends to dissociate in lessons, so she's so anxious she goes into a kind of trance and just stares into space. She can hear what's going on, but she can't tell what's being said. And then when she comes round, she feels very shaky, sometimes very angry. The teachers don't seem to understand that. One teacher waved in front of her face. "Come on, get back in the room." And this teacher had been in the meetings with all the information.
All adopted people have been removed or given up by a parent, and I suppose that comes with a sense of rejection and loss, if you strip it back to its bare bones. Exclusion just kind of fuels that feeling of I'm different, I've done something wrong, I can't quite understand why I've done something wrong, but I'm being excluded for it. It can be incredibly shaming.
It's completely the wrong thing for, I feel, for any child, but particularly for an adopted child to be isolated when it's like the opposite they need. They actually need someone to be understanding, giving them the time to kind of calm down so that they can explain themselves.
There's just been a prevailing fear of never doing enough, being enough, never good enough, and I guess that links to an issue of abandonment and scared that if I don't do enough, then I'm not worthy to be around, I guess.
Year 8 started, and I started to get bullied quite badly, and my mental health went downhill. The teachers didn't really understand, and the same in year 9, and then I left.
When I changed over to high school, people kept bullying me because I was adopted and I had no friends. Quite sad, because I don't think that people shouldn't be your friend just because you're adopted.
I know my son was teased. There was a rhyme going round school about adopted children, that the child that the mother didn't want and things like that.
So I've had people come up to me and they've purposefully shouted at me and said horrible things just to get a reaction, because they know that they can tap into the fact that I was adopted, because these are the people that they tend to pick on everyone, but they will single you out if you're adopted, and they do it so systematically that it's frightening.
It is quite hard because at school and that you would get picked on about being adopted, which is quite unfair because I know in schools they do a lot about racism and all that, but then they don't do much on adoption.
In a lesson, I've had kids who have really said, the parents you live with, they're not your real parents, and I'm like, you're not in any position to say that to me. There was a lot of physical violence in my school. I was really scared to reach out to my school and ask them to do things for me.
Change for adopted young people is really tricky, and it can be the simplest of changes that you or I may take for granted. So changing classrooms, moving to a different part of a classroom, moving to a different part of a school, they're all changes, and they can elicit a whole range of difficult kind of experiences for adopted young people.
The change from primary school to high school was difficult because I don't like change.
I think high school was a bit more difficult It's basically like just starting out on a blank canvas, so none of them know, so then they end up just figuring out and then they start saying stuff.
When they got older and moved to high school and then 14 plus college, that my daughter started experiencing real problems.
It's navigating secondary school itself, where you've had in primary school traditionally one teacher per year group. You have now got several teachers and you're moving class to class.
So from my personal experiences as an adopted adult now, I've gone through the school system, obviously right from primary school through to university. And I guess in primary school, it wasn't so much of an issue, but definitely around the time of year 6 and moving into secondary school or high school, a lot of personal anxiety kicked in. That's when I had my first panic attack.
That transition up to high school is really hard. You know, we often hear that primary school is a lot more stable because they have one teacher every year. There's often key people, it's more nurturing. High school is it's like a bomb being dropped in some young people's lives. Like, they have to manage so much more. That's where a lot of the trickiness comes into play, I suppose.
If we acknowledge that change elicits challenges for adopted young people, we're now putting them into a much larger environment and expecting them to move through different changes each day. So not just person to person, different teaching style to different teaching style, class to class. And I just would really urge schools and teachers not to underestimate how important it is for adopted young people to be seen and noticed in school. There are really easy ways to support young people who are adopted from the point that an adopted child comes into the school. What do we need to do? What do we need to know? What's acceptable for us to know? And what do we need to know in order to support that young person?
There should be support, even if it's just they put some time aside to sit in a room with you and just not talk, or just talk if you want to talk, or just do something.
When I speak to my parents about it, they email the school about it, and then that ends up being really helpful for me. I do feel like the school and my parents should be talking more, even if there's a small problem.
Listen to what the parents say and really understand that the reason they're telling you this is because it's important.
All too often what we find, a child can have been in, secondary school for a year or two, be really, really challenging. And actually what happens when you bring the parents and the schools together, they're on really different pages. So having that communication between school and home from the outset, it's hugely, hugely important.
I think what schools can offer and what is most helpful is having a secure or safe place, whether that be like a physical place to go to or a teacher that they can talk to or relate to about those issues, and have that sort of continual pastoral support and care.
Really taking relationships as a starting point. Young people thrive off good relationships, so building relationships with young people is really, I'm sure as a teacher you want to have really good relationships with young people, as do they. So how can schools create that, I suppose?
For some young people, as they enter the secondary school system, there may have been that kind of partnership working between schools, so they could have plans in school. So for some young people, they might have something called a pupil passport, which tells their teachers things that help them and things that don't help them. And it could be simple as a male voice that's raised. That could be a trauma trigger. So having some knowledge about that.
To make me feel really supported in high school, the teachers would have had to do something really, really simple, and that was to follow up with what they've said they're going to do.
When the children went to school, we'd already been up and explained to the teachers that they were adopted and the particular problems that they might have, and the fact that they were very quiet sometimes. We've had meeting after meeting after meeting at college. They agree with what you're saying, they're taking it all on board, and within a week or so they're back to the rules and regulations, and if you don't fit into this way of this sort of behaviour, you get excluded. They just completely forget what you've been saying.
They have the system, it's just making it implemented. When they have these systems and teachers are not following them, it really does kind of make you feel like they don't care about you at all. Because when we joined the school, they were saying, we have support here. We have teachers that are trained, we have teachers that know what they're doing, they've been here a long time, and they're going to support you. But they need to go through that and make sure it's fulfilled.
If we're setting plans up for young people in our schools, we need to adhere to them. We need to be reviewing them regularly. We need to be having that engagement with parents. And if things aren't working, why aren't they working? What can we do differently?
I know at schools there's supposed to be someone who's informed, but I don't know who that is at my school.
Where in school can that young person access support, and who are those dedicated people?
When seasons such as GCSE kicked in, where there was that expectation to meet a certain level, those overriding anxieties and depression and other issues started to kick in. And the thing that helped me through that most was having one teacher in particular who never judged. She never really asked questions. She just said, you know what, if you need anything, I'm here, and this is a classroom that you can come to.
I had a teacher who was really adamant that I was going to enjoy my last year of high school. And she made that happen for me because she cared enough to do it. I trusted her so much because she did that for me. And if every teacher did that, nobody would struggle at high school. Nobody. Whether you're adopted or not, you're not going to struggle if there's a teacher there that's going to fight for you. She really did encourage me so much. She brought my confidence levels up. She made me less anxious on the corridors because I was scared of getting shouted at by other children.
That meet and greet on a morning, a dedicated, consistent person, teacher, doesn't have to be a teacher. In some schools we've had receptionists or lunchtime supervisors, but that key personnel, first thing on a morning, to notice them, acknowledge something about them, and to do that at the end of the day as well.
The easiest thing that a teacher or teaching staff can do, number one, is just awareness and thinking about checking in with that child. And that is easy to do.
I think school does quite a lot to help support me, but the thing is, like I said quite a lot of times, like educating other people on it more, so like they understand what it's like to be adopted.
There's a lot of lack of education. It's not included in any curriculum, and we're not considered when talking about curriculums. We'll talk about everybody else's experience. We'll do people whose parents are divorced, or people who have single parents, or people who have same-sex families, and they do everything except for kids that have been adopted.
Probably more education in these areas would be quite beneficial for not just us, but for everybody else. So therefore we don't have that awkward minute of silence when we say, oh yeah, I'm adopted. It's just, each time I say that, I can just see it in their eyes. They'd be like, oh, okay.
They'll start saying stuff, oh, there's many reasons why people would be adopted, and people would put their hands up saying, oh, is it because their parents are dead, not realising that there might be more adopted people in the class than they actually realise.
They talk a lot about like other things, but they don't bring up stuff about adopted people. I think they could do like some assemblies on it and like let some adopted people tell the school about how they felt.
And then to include that awareness in planning of lessons, like the types of texts you might be reading or traumatic events, to have an awareness that could be triggering to an adopted child, and maybe to check in with them before a lesson and then even after a lesson to consider what sorts of texts are being used as well, or videos and so on, things like that.
Certain topics can be really difficult. For example, at my old school when I did Spanish, there's a massive topic on family and friends, and it's describing family members, and you've got an adopted family that you can talk about, but you don't want to discard and forget about the fact you've got another family somewhere else who you might not know how to describe. You can find that really difficult.
There was a lesson in which one of the teachers was talking about adopted children, and she said, when children are adopted, the parents get paid. Somebody put their hand up and asked about adopted children, and another child in the class said, oh, I'm going to be adopted, I'm going to adopt children then because you get paid for it. And then that made my daughter feel really bad.
There's a disconnect between that and the training that teachers get, so it's not a fault or a blame that kind of lies with the teachers, but there is something that's not happening in the training of teachers and the understanding from a school perspective about what an adopted or a care experienced young person might be bringing into school with them every day.
If teachers were more educated, like they could help the students who are adopted, but right now they just think it's nothing and they won't help you.
All staff should really have training and better understand adopted people's needs and looked after children. I'm not saying, but there is a difference. But I think that as a basic level, but creating that sense of safety for young people in school is so important.
Teachers don't seem to know enough detail, enough information about it. So it has caused problems in lessons. One of the teachers said a lot of children who have adopted, a lot of them end up taking drugs or in prison. So that was another thing that, really upset my daughter.
We deserve to be treated better, but it's just because people aren't taught about it and they're not told this is what can happen. And it doesn't need to be a really in-depth specific thing, but it's just about awareness.
In schools, there are mandatory trainings such as safeguarding and a whole range of other things for teachers. We need to get trauma-informed learning on that agenda. Without that on the agenda, we will not change things.
We've heard young people speak today about behaviour and how they wish they were understood, and I think if there was one person in school that understands you, great, but if all staff in school understood adoption better, how amazing would that be for our young people?
All of this is around knowledge about trauma, and it's around knowledge of the children and the young people that you've got in your classroom.
I think if I knew someone who was starting high school, straight away I'd be telling them to drill it into the teachers, what it's like and what your mind goes through and what you go through on a day-to-day, and have things in place right from the beginning.
I think it's just important for schools to acknowledge that there is lifelong trauma and that they have an important role to play in children's lives, in the fact that they are home away from home, and where home's a massive question mark. They have a really important role in providing security and stability for children who have those sort of questions in their lives.
Just maybe taking the time to find out a bit more about adopted children and how they feel, and and the process that they've gone through to get where they are, and that would be a big help.
I think in order to really push schools towards helping adoptees, it would just be get someone there that really knows what they're doing. Just one member of staff, hire or train someone deeply into adoption so that they've done lots and lots of work on them. They're really, really knowledgeable and they know all of the new studies about adoptees, and they understand how our brains can function sometimes. That teacher needs to be introduced to every adoptee that goes to that school.
And I've seen when schools are open and want to work in partnership to increase their responsibility and their support to adopted young people, something really quite beautiful happens.
We're not naughty kids. Just because you think our behaviour is challenging, that doesn't mean that we're naughty or we're doing it wrong or we're trying to annoy you on purpose. It's different ways that we can deal with the things that have gone on in our life. And school's difficult for us. And it's not made it easier by people just dishing out punishments and not sitting and talking and realising what's actually going on or why people are acting like that.
Well, I could give school lots of messages as a professional, but what I would really be urging schools to do is I really want you to listen to the voices of these young people who've taken the time to share with you what their school experiences are like, and developing practices so that schools become safe, trauma-informed and attachment-friendly places for our adopted young people to grow. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you really enjoyed watching that film.
I'm just going to go into the chat and have a little look at what people have been posting as part of their reflections. Some really nice comments about how beautiful the film's been made, and people really glad that this awareness is now being made to try and make a change. I think there's not only really powerful messages in that film for me about the experiences of these adopted young people, but actually they're also really skilled at kind of sharing some of the tips and ideas they've got themselves about what could change the school experience, not just for them. And I think there's a really important kind of legacy they're leaving for the next generation of adopted young children kind of coming through our school systems, about kind of really listening into some of those messages and us working all together to kind of make those changes happen. Yeah, so again, people feeling like the film has really, really hit home, and wonderful that you're going to share this far and wide. I said earlier in the introduction that not long after this session has completed, we will be uploading this to our YouTube channel, and there is also a link in the chat to that YouTube channel. So please do share this film far and wide, because I think together we can kind of champion that change on behalf of these, really courageous young people and their families. Again, fantastic film. Some of the difficulties that people are kind of having in schools as well, around that lack of support, that lack of knowledge around adoption. We had an event yesterday with adopted young adults, and very, very similar themes they were sharing as they kind of looked back and they reflected on their own kind of experiences in school. We've got the same messages with this generation within this film, so we've got to get much better at that. Setting up relationships between parents and school from the outset is a really, really kind of crucial sort of starting point wherever that is possible. People also really sharing some kind of sad memories about things that kind of weren't diagnosed, and young people struggling in school, and we hear that a lot. And in the film we've heard about people being excluded, and that behaviour that's trying to communicate something, but young people really not having the narrative, not having that kind of cognition to express, how they're feeling. Yeah, again, we've also added in the chat some resources made by some of our adopted young people who are part of our adopting service. They've done a top tips for school, which has been fantastic, and we're just working with them at the moment on top tips for transitions. So watch this space for some of those. And again, some fantastic film. Can't wait to start sharing. It's music to my ears, because for me and the rest of us that kind of work as part of the adopting service, it's a real privilege to be alongside these young people and kind of hear their stories. And it's not just about hearing their stories, it's about being really congruent about what we do with those stories, so that we can kind of go back to these young people and see, you shared this with us, you told us what was needed, and this is the change that's happening. So I'd just like to thank everybody once again for coming. And again, if you have any questions that you of an education nature that you'd like to get in touch with us about, please do put that in your feedback form along with your email, and we will look at those and we will come back to you. But once again, thank you for enjoying this film and for the incredible comments. I'm really, really glad you've enjoyed this film and found it inspiring, and that you'll be able to take this away and share far and wide with other colleagues and professionals. So thank you.